Thank you, Mary. We now move to our last contributor, last but not least, Nikki Gallagher from SOLAS. Is going to talk about the branding for further education and training, issues I think which have been raised in many of your feedback this morning, many of your feedback contributions this morning. So, Nikki, if you can take it from there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Nikki Gallagher. I'm the Director of Communications at SOLAS. The last time I stood on a stage in this room, I was actually taking part in Strictly Come Dancing, and there were 100 people in the audience, or 1,000 people in the audience. I'm not quite sure which was more nerve-wracking. So I'm delighted to be with you today, and I'm also delighted to be with you here in the sector. I joined SOLAS earlier this year, and I suppose for me what really attracted me to the further education and training sector are the values that you espouse, and I hope the values that we share, the values of dignity, empowerment, inclusion, participation, and they're all the kind of things that I'm seeing and hearing today in the room and in my engagement with all the ETBIs and the providers throughout the year. I suppose by way of background, I worked for a human rights organisation for 10 years. I was with the Ombudsman for Children's Office. I was head of communications, but I also headed the education and participation function of the office. And during that time, we worked with a lot of very vulnerable children and young people. And one thing that really struck me, particularly when young people were not in the care of their families, was the importance they placed on education and the value that teachers added to their lives. So we worked with homeless children, we worked with children in St. Patrick's Prison, we worked with separated children and children in the care of the state. And I can tell you in every single one of those projects we worked on, people told us how education had changed their lives. And I understand, obviously, we're talking about adult learners in the FET sector, but you're still carrying those values and still carrying that huge commitment to individuals throughout. And never underestimate, I suppose, the impact that you can all have individually and we can have collectively on the lives of people, whether it's active inclusion or whether it's about developing skills to give them a job and to give them the dignity of work. Together, we're having a huge impact on our society. I suppose, like education is an agent for change, I would argue that communications is also an agent for change. And again, back to some of my previous experience, I worked on a particular project with children in St. Patrick's Prison. We weren't allowed, as the Ombudsman for Children, to take complaints from children in prison. So we decided we were going to find a way around this. We weren't going to take no for an answer. So we went in and we talked to children about their experiences. We took their own words and we turned them into an animation, a very serious animation. We wrote a report, we worked with the government, we worked with the Irish Prison Service, and then we worked with the media. And by creating a platform for these children's voices and letting people understand what it was really like to be a young person in an adult prison environment, we brought about very positive, significant changes. And we weren't saying for a second that there wasn't a reason why these young people had been incarcerated, but it's up to us as a society and as a state to decide how we treat people. And the power of these young people's voices meant that the law was changed and the Ombudsman for Children was allowed to take complaints. And also the government stopped sending children to, or the courts stopped sending children to an adult prison and moved them to Oberstown. So it was a very powerful lesson for me that if you create the appropriate platform for people to have their say in a way that's, I suppose, engaging, it can really shift how we think about things. And there's a lot of talk this morning about how we have to change how people think about further education and training. And that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about here today. So, first of all, I think we can all agree FET has an image problem. Is it fair? And does it matter? Most people don't know what further education and training is. They might understand the terms PLCs or apprenticeship, but there's not really a catch-all statement. I know my colleague Fiona quoted the FET service or the FET strategy this morning, but most people, it doesn't trip off your tongue. So what exactly is further education and training? And one of the benefits and one of the challenges is that it's such a broad area. And part of my job at SOLAS, and I suppose part of our own jobs here, will be to kind of how do we distill this down to make it into a concept that people understand and can relate to. So there's a lot of discussion about evidence and research this morning. We decided on the communication side that we also needed to have some evidence to build a communication strategy on. We commissioned Red Sea to do a survey for us. They did a random sample of 1,000 people, 1,001 people in March this year. And the majority of people didn't know what FET was, but they were all able to relate to apprenticeship, PLCs, momentum courses, back to education courses. And 40% of the population said they had some direct experience, either themselves or their family, of further education and training once we explained the term to them. There was a lot of support for further education and training, but particularly amongst an older demographic, so 45 years plus, and not so much with a younger demographic. And that's a challenge for us. That's something that we need to address ourselves as a sector. My colleague John McGrath was part of an employer survey earlier this year also, and in that employer survey, which was a small sample to be fair, the majority of people had very positive things to say about FET graduates, but the majority of people didn't recognise that they were employing FET graduates. And that, again, is very interesting. People don't name what FET is. So everybody understands third level, everybody understands people who went to a university or a college, but they don't necessarily understand what a FET graduate is. And that's another challenge for us. We need to be able to make sure people understand, well, actually, these are the kind of people who I have working for me. These are the kind of people who are making a huge contribution to my business. Michael O'Leary is a very famous example. In his usual colourful self, a number of years ago, Michael O'Leary said he would never hire a false trainee. Well, who do you think is servicing your planes, Michael? So, we're here today to talk about brand. And your brand is more than your logo. Your brand, you have a brand name, but then you also have a brand which is about values. And that's really what I believe we as a sector need to decide on. It's our values we need to communicate. We don't need a large advertising campaign to say, hey, look at us, we're doing these courses, aren't we great? We need to get across all of the things that all of the people in this room and all of your colleagues back in the 16 ETBs around the country are already doing. It's making sure that every interface any individual has with a further education and training provider, with an ETB, that they go away having the same feeling. Like the Minister said this morning, there has to be consistency around the country. So how can we change FET's image? And what do we want it to be? This is an example that's being used a lot in market research at the moment. When people find it difficult to kind of say, we want to be X. You know, do you want to be a Bentley? Do you want to be a Nissan Note? Do you want to be a sports car? And I'm being a little bit flippant here, but it's about just trying to understand how do we position ourselves as a sector. Are we the sector that I suppose can lead to employment? Are we the sector that is a second chance sector? Are we the sector that allows progression into higher education? And we need to figure out where exactly we stand there. Possibly we're a combination of all of those. But the one thing I would say is that there's a Cinderella image around further education and training, and that's really not fair. And it's not fair on any of us who work in the sector, and it's especially not fair for the people who we support to I suppose, upskill and to, I suppose, develop their own, personal ambition and personal goals. So, promoting the standing of further education and training is goal 6 in the FET strategy. And I believe the way that we can change the image of the sector is by celebrating the good, promoting the excellent, and continuously improving, using our evidence to continuously improve what can be improved. We're a learning sector. We have to be able to learn ourselves. So, when you think about all of these things, and I thought about a lot of this before I came in here today, do we need a communications and branding strategy for the sector? And I believe, yes, we actually do. I think we need something that has strategic objectives. We need to figure out who we're talking to, what we want them to say. We need to make sure we're reaching them in an appropriate way and using measured outcomes. So really, I suppose what that means is the issue of snobbery has come up a lot in the room today. People feel, the mammies and daddies of Ireland don't always feel that it's the most appropriate route for their child, or they want their child to go to college or third level. I mean, you find with the universities that lots of people go in at the lowest point course of the universities simply because they want to be able to say they attended Trinity or UCD or UCC. So we need to, I suppose, we need to be able to address all of that. I mean, we all know the story of the mother ringing for help. Her son is drowning in the river, and it's, "Guard, can you help my son, the doctor? He's drowning in the river." So it's trying to move away from that. And we are going after hearts and minds. So it is a cultural shift. It's changing how people think. We need people to start considering, okay, well, these are my interests. This is my aptitude, and these are where the opportunities are. And then from there, they choose whatever the most appropriate education route might be, whether that's level 1, level 2, or level 10. And really, that's the kind of cultural shift that we need to bring about in Irish society. And communications and branding will help do that, but it's the work of all of us in the room. It's the ongoing, day-to-day, incremental change that we will bring about in the sector, and we will get the message out there that this is a really, really good option for you wherever you are in life. You may choose other options, but you have to, I suppose, we would like you to consider FET as an option for you as well. We need to get it right, and lots of money and lots of effort doesn't mean you're always going to get it right, and some of the biggies have failed miserably. Coca-Cola rebranded as New Coke, it didn't work. 16 million was spent in the UK rebranding the post office to Consignia. It didn't last 6 months before it went back to the post office. So I suppose there's no magic bullet is what I'm trying to say, that it's not going to happen overnight. It will be incremental, but it will also have to be collective for us for this to work. What we can certainly do from the SOLAS point of view and working with our colleagues in the ETBs and ETBI is help put a branding and communication strategy together, which we will trickle down through the sector. But we need your input, and then I suppose we need to make sure that we're all living the values and living all the things that we say we're going to do. A fancy communication strategy in its own right isn't really going to work. The World Skills Competition, I suppose, is a really good example of this for me, and I suppose of the challenges and opportunities ahead. I came across the World Skills Competition about 4 or 5 months into my job at SOLAS. And I went and met the the Ireland Skills team, and I also met their mentors, and I was bowled over by the level of talent and the commitment and the drive, and how amazingly fabulous to go and represent your country at an international event. Well, to say I broke my heart to get media coverage on this is an understatement. I don't think I have ever worked so hard to achieve media coverage. It took me 6 weeks before I got any of the papers to sit up and listen, and I was knocking on their door every single day. In the end, I was sort of saying to people, hang on a minute now, you're telling me your values are this, this and this, and yet you're not covering this. And at exactly the same time, we had the kids with the 9 A1s on the front page of all the national newspapers and on the news every night. And I'm sorry, that is not fair and that is not acceptable, and that's not something that we can allow to happen. So that kind of made us redouble our efforts, and we went back at it. And in the end, we actually, I suppose, once we started to get a little bit of a shift, we brought about a real change. We had over 100 articles and radio slots, the majority of those locally, but we did have some great stuff in the national dailies. And David McWilliams wrote a really fantastic column about why trades are a good option for you. Fergus Finlay also wrote a really good column in his Irish Examiner weekly column. Again, sort of saying to parents of Ireland, you need to open your minds a little bit because there are really good options here. We were able to arrange for the team to meet the Taoiseach and the Minister for Skills, and then President Higgins recently hosted a reception for the team at the Áras. But again, you would imagine if these guys had been wearing sporting jerseys, the media would have been at the airport to greet them, and that wasn't the case. They went out, they represented us, they did us extremely proud. We won 2 gold medals and 8 medallions of excellence. The 2 gold medals were in hotel services, and the second one was in aircraft maintenance. Now we are the only country in the world who has won that medal 4 consecutive competitions, and I have told every journalist I know until I'm blue in the face, and they all think that's a brilliant story, and it has not appeared in print and it has not appeared on the airways. So even though we have all this success to point to, we still know there's an awful long way to go, and that's when we were handing them the full package. So there's an awful lot of work, there's a lot of challenges, but the very fact that FET is so unknown creates a huge amount of opportunity. We can mould this into what we want it to be. The communication side of things is really just sitting on top and tying together all of the good work that's already going on in the sector. And together, I think we can really make a big difference. You can see that in Australia, TAFE is such a well-known brand. Everybody knows what a TAFE college is. People feel proud to align themselves to it, to put it on their CVs. We need to get to the same, I suppose, situation in Ireland. So I'm just going to leave you, thank you very much, and I'm just going to leave you with a short video that SOLAS has developed as part of our own communication strategy. Thank you.